Hello. Welcome back to video number 6 of building your own AI assistant. In this video, I'm gonna show you how to use local AI with Ollama and n8n to translate metadata on YouTube like title or description in an automated way. In our last video, we had built an AI agent that was able to use 2 custom tools we have built along with the agent. So we had the get metadata tool and we had the translation agent tool. When you have watched the previous video, you might remember that we have built out the get metadata tool for our agent, and for the translation agent, we basically just created a dummy. And as this tool is a little bit more complicated than just fetching the metadata, we are doing this in this video here. So just to get us on the same page, I just made a couple of small improvements to the agent from the last video. So the first thing I decided to do is I included the target languages in the HTTP request. This will make the whole agent more flexible because in the last video we have included the target languages within the prompt for our agent, and that of course is static. So I can just call this agent over the webhook and just submit the languages I want the agent to be processing here. So that means when we have a look at our prompt here, we got rid of the part where the target languages are defined. This, of course, also affects the tool call for our translation agent and the structure we have defined for submitting to our tool. I also made 2 other changes to the tool call because I had a very, very small error rate when it comes to submitting the correct video ID or submitting the correct target languages. And that is why I have taken out the target languages and the video ID from the JSON example down here. And I moved it to the extra workflow inputs here. So here we submit the video ID that comes from our webhook, and we do the same for the target language. And that basically eliminates any margin of error that the AI could produce on this here. So let's get started and build our translation tool here. So when I head back to our translation tool, that is exactly the same as we left off in the last video. So here we have the incoming data, and here we just have the response to the agent. That will just be a response field with the value success in this case. To get this started, I have pinned some data here to my webhook, so I don't need to call it all the time. And as you can see here, I have the video ID in the body and the target languages. And for the video ID, I will just fetch a video ID from a video I have made a long time ago, and that does not have any translations yet, and just copy that in here. So I will just simulate the webhook call here and start our AI agent. And now it will process our request here and do the exact same steps as we have seen in our last video. So it will start to use the get metadata tool and hopefully submit the retrieved metadata to our translation tool here. And now our agent has finished, and as you can see, it has successfully called our translation agent. And when we have a look here and look at the logs, you can see that we used the get video metadata tool and then processed the response and submitted it to the translation agent here. And now we can just head to our dummy translation tool and build the whole workflow out in order to get it working. So when I am in the translation agent here and I go to executions, I can see my past execution here, and I can also have a look at the data here. And I will just copy this data here, and I will just paste the data in and save it. And now I have pinned the data, and that will make developing our workflow much more easy because we don't have to trigger the previous step for the agent every time we change something. And the response for our agent, that should also be the same, and I will just leave it in here and make a little bit more space here. And then we can start building this out. So when we have a look at our data structure here, we have a query parameter with the original title, the description, and the source language. And here we have the video ID and the target languages. The first thing I would like to do is I want to split out the data here. And the reason I want to have this split out is I want to submit each individual target language to a large language model, and I don't want to send them all at once because this will dramatically lower the error rate on the large language model. So instead of just throwing the whole data set at the large language model, we divide it into more easy to handle bits and pieces for the. So what I do here is I just drag in the target languages as the field I want to spread out on. And then I select the other fields I want to include here. And these fields are the video ID. And I also want to include the source language, the original title, and the original description here. And then I will just connect to set nodes here. So one above here and the second one here. And what I'm doing here is basically on this route here, we will just use a basic LLM chain here in order to process our translation here. And down here, we will just process the other data like the video ID, the original title, and the original description, because we will also need that later on in our request we send to Google. So for the model, I will just take a Ollama model here, and in this case, I take Qwen 2.5, 32 billion. The thing is, the bigger the model, the better the translation here. And of course, you can do that also with the smaller models like Llama 3.2. But for the use cases I have tested, the bigger the model, the better the results for the translation tasks here. Dependent on the large language model you are choosing, you might need to make a different variation here because the smaller models tend not to be so good at following instructions. So I will show you that later on in the video. Basically, a solution for a smaller, not so clever model would be to split out the title and the description into separate calls to the large language model, and that will most of the time be enough in order to get a good translation out. So let's have a look what we are doing at these nodes here. So for this edit node, I will just rename this one to set LLM inputs here. And here I will just do a manual mapping here, and let's get some data in. So I execute the pinned data and the split out process. And now we have data incoming here. And what I would like to do is I would like to bring the data into a form that we will need for the YouTube API anyway. So when we have a look at the YouTube API and we go for the documentation for video update, we can basically build out how this will look like. So for example, when I open the API editor here, the first thing we need to do is we need to tell the API what kind of data we want to touch here. So we want to take the localizations here. And in this case, we also need the snippet. And down here, we can very easily build an example structure here. So when we start with the localizations here, you can see here we have something like German, for example, and then we have a title, and then we have a description here. And of course, we do this for different languages. So we make French, title, description. And if we want to send translations over to a video that has no translations at all, we need to also include a snippet and tell the YouTube API what our default values are. For this case, we include snippet here and we give it the category ID. In my case, the category ID is 27, which is education. We need to submit the default language, which is English in my case here. And we also need to send over title and description for the English language. And that's basically how the final request we will send to Google at the end of this workflow has to look like. And as I said, I already want to start building this structure as early as possible. So in this case, that affects the localization part, and that we will set in the node just before the translation job for our large language model. We can start setting our fields, and I set this to an expression and open this up here. And I would like to start with the parameter input, where we sum up the localizations here. And now I can just pull in the source language. And as you can see, this will evaluate to English. And just call this title here. And for the value, I will also choose an expression here. And here I can just drag in the original title. And of course, we need to do the same for the description. So set this to an expression also and make this description here. And we do the same here for the original description. And then I will also define the source language here. Just drag this one in and also do the same for the target language here. And now I can just test the step. We have a look at the schema here. You can see we have input at the top, and then we have the localizations and the English, the title, the description, and here down here we have the source language and the target language. And now we can go to our large language model here. So I just copy my prompt in here, and this is a basic prompt here just with a small set of rules. So it starts with translate this JSON object from the source language, which is our incoming source language here, into the target language. And here we define the target language. And as you can see here, this evaluates to English and German in this case. And here I have a set of rules. So I want to make sure that the large language model preserves the structure of the JSON object we put into it. And I also want to make sure, as we are talking about YouTube descriptions that have formatting and new lines and emojis and so on and so forth in it, I want to make sure that the large language model keeps the basic structure when translating. And the third point on my list here is that I tell the large language model that the localization part of the JSON object needs to refer to the target language. And actually, when I have a look here, this is something we will probably not need. So when I head back to my set node here, we can just remove this one here and instead use the target language and test our step again. And now when we are back at the large language model, we can take this one out, make this number 3, number 4, and number 5. The third rule is about how to do the translation, because when you have a language like German or French, you have a polite and an impolite form or a casual form. For my own YouTube descriptions, I want to make sure that when it comes to German or French, that we have the friendly casual form here. And that also goes for the point 4 and 5. The 7th rule is to only output the translated JSON object as a valid JSON string here. And down here, I just give the large language model the input object here. So now we can just test this step here. And now you can see the large language model has finished. And when we have a look here, you can see that we have 3 localizations here. We have one for German, one for French, and one for Spanish. And one small thing I have noticed here is we have changed the localizations to target language in this case, but on the second field I left in the source language. So I will just quickly correct that, and I will just pin the output data here for later on. And of course, we need to change this one also. So just to remove this one and also put in the target language here. And after the translation, I will add another set node here and just name this one parse LLM response. And the reason why I want to parse this is we just have a JSON string. And of course, I want to work with the different fields that are available in our translation object here later on in our workflow. So I need to parse the JSON string here. And in order to do that, I need to set up a couple of fields here. So first of all, we will start with the field name. And in this case, we want to, again, follow the structure of the output we want to have for YouTube here. And then, of course, I want to have this flexible because this will output different language keys dependent on the target language. And what I can do here now is I can just create an expression here. And I can take JSON dot text dot, and then we take the parse JSON function here, and then we choose localizations. We want to have the language for the first item. And you can see this will evaluate to German language in this case here. And then at the end, we add a title. And that is the structure I want to achieve here. And for the description, we can basically do the same. So I will just rename this one to description. And of course, this also needs to be an expression. And when we have a look here, this will be basically the same. And for the values, we do something similar. So here we can directly choose JSON.text.parseJSON localizations. And here we go for the values. And we want to have the first one for the item here. And we want to have the title in this case. And as you can see, this evaluates to the German title. And for the description, we can do the same. So we set this to an expression and copy this over. And we can just select our description here. And now we're good to go. We can test this step. And you can see the structure here. So we have localizations, and then we have the key for the language here, and then we have the title and the description in the corresponding language. Now let's have a look at the second branch here, and I will just rename this to set video data. And here I just want to pass the video ID, the original title, and the original description. And we can just set this to an expression and get the video ID, the original title, and the original description here. And now test this step. And as you can see here, we got 3 objects here. That's a little bit redundant. Technically, 1 object would be good enough here. But as we had different target languages, this has also split out 3 times here. After setting the data formats here, I of course want to merge all of this together again. So I will just take a merge node and set this to combine. And we want to combine by position. And in this case, we have 2 inputs here. So just let me connect this. So when we test our data here, you can see that we get this structure here. So we have the language, the title, and the description. And down here we have the video ID, the original title, and the original description. So basically we have everything we need in order to set an API call for the YouTube API. So when you want to send translations for titles and description to the YouTube API, you need to make sure that you send all the different translations in one request. So we need to set this all at once. And in order to do that, I will create a code node here in n8n. Just rename this here. And I have already prepared this. That is just a basic function to merge the incoming items into one big item here. So we define a merged item here, and this will already hold the structure that YouTube expects here. So we have the video ID, we have the snippet, with the original title, the original description, the default language, and our category ID. Down here, I have just defined the localizations as an empty object. And here we just have a for loop that will assign the incoming items to the localizations up here. So when we test the step here, you can see we get out one item. And let's have a look at the schema here. And you can see we have the localizations, and under localizations, we have the different languages here. And I just move this over here. And now we could start building our request here. Last time when we made the metadata tool, we just used the YouTube node. And on the YouTube node, there is an update video, but the YouTube node is not able to send in all the localizations at once. And that's why we need to make a custom HTTP request in this case. So we just take the HTTP request node here. And what we want to do is we want to make a put request. And for the endpoint, we put in the endpoint we found in the YouTube documentation. So when we have a look here, you can see here we have the put request and the endpoint we need to talk to. For the authentication, I will just take a predefined authentication type and just search for YouTube and just use the YouTube credentials I have defined in our last video here. And now we need to set up the request like we did in this API Explorer here. So I will just do this once more, and we just do like localizations and the snippet here. And when you have a look here, the localization and the snippet is sent over as query parameters here. So we can do the same here. So we just hit the send query parameters, and this needs to be part, like in the example you can see here. These two are sent separately, but what you can also do is you can just send both of them at once, just divided by comma here. Now we need to define our body parameters. So we will just check send body. And first of all, we need to send over the video ID. And then we define localizations, and we can just pull in localizations here. And we do the same for the snippet in this case. Just pull it in. And now we can test our execution here. And you can see we get a response from YouTube here. And when I get back to my video and refresh, you can see that we got our translations here. As you can see, this is working. So all we need to do to have this respond correctly to our AI agent is to connect the HTTP request to the response. And of course, what would be good practice here is just to handle the error case. So in case this request is successful, we will respond, and otherwise we will just send another response. But that's pretty easy to do. I will leave that up to you when you try this. So that's basically the whole workflow and how you could do it. As I said in the start of the video, there's also another way we could handle it. I have also created a different variation of this workflow. So in case you're using a large language model that is not as big and not as capable as the Qwen 2.5 I am using here, basically the workflow is very similar. The only thing we are doing here is that we split the title and the description into two different LLM calls in order to make handling easier. And then afterwards, we parse this into a JSON object. But the workflow is basically the same. So that was a rundown on how to build the translation tool for our AI agent. This is still a basic concept because there are still some things that need to be refined. So, for example, on our large language model call, we didn't respect that there are limitations. So, for example, YouTube has a limitation on the title for 100 characters. And of course, when translating, it can happen that you come over the 100 character limit. And this is not yet in our workflow here. So that is something that needs to be refined in this workflow. But I hope you could get a basic overview on how to build a tool like this. And as you can see, this is all working in the end, and we could successfully send over our AI generated translations to YouTube. I will link all the code down in the comments, so you can just copy and paste this into your own n8n instance. And if you have questions, just drop me a comment and I will try to help as good as I can. So that's it from me today. Have a nice time. Bye bye.